She's lying. I saw what she did. The courtroom had been tense before, but now it was electric. All eyes turned to the youngest person in the room, Romy Reiner. Her voice cracked as she pointed a trembling hand across the courtroom at her older sister, Tracy. The cameras froze. Reporters fumbled with pens. The judge banged the gavel, calling for order. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. But there was no order left in the Reiner family. Just days earlier, this was the untouchable dynasty of Hollywood, a family synonymous with laughter, creativity, and cinematic brilliance. Rob Reiner, the man who gave the world When Harry Met Sally, A Few Good Men, and Stand By Me, now lay 6 feet under. His beloved wife Michelle, gone too, and their son Nick, in jail, charged with their brutal, calculated murders. But what if Nick wasn't the only one? What if the real story was far more twisted than the headlines suggested? And what if someone the public adored, someone who had walked red carpets, smiled in family portraits, and sat beside her parents during award shows, had blood on her hands? This wasn't just a courtroom drama. This was a war. A war of siblings, secrets, and stories that didn't quite line up. At the center of it all stood 2 sisters, one in tears, the other in fury. And a question that cut through the polished facade of Hollywood royalty like a blade through silk. Did Tracy Reiner help kill her own parents? Let's take it back to where it began. The American dream, shattered. To the outside world, the Reiners had it all. Fame, wealth, legacy. Rob Reiner wasn't just a filmmaker. He was Hollywood royalty. Son of the legendary Carl Reiner, Rob inherited more than a famous name. He inherited a spotlight. And for decades, he used it to build an empire. His wife, Michelle Singer Reiner, was his rock. Quiet, intelligent, and fiercely protective of their children. Together, they raised 3 kids in a Brentwood estate that looked like something out of a movie, because, in many ways, it was. Nick, Tracy, Romy. The public barely knew their names. And maybe that was the point. Behind the glamorous smiles and red carpet appearances, the Reiners valued privacy. Or so it seemed. But privacy, like glass, only stays intact until the first crack. And when Rob and Michelle were found stabbed to death in their multi-million-dollar home, the glass didn't just crack, it shattered. The scene that changed everything. It was a Sunday. The kind of quiet Los Angeles morning where palm trees swayed in the breeze, and neighbors walked dogs without a care in the world. Until the sirens came. Brentwood hadn't seen violence like this in years. 2 bodies, multiple stab wounds, blood everywhere, and their son, Nick, found wandering in the guest house, allegedly incoherent, barefoot, and muttering something no one could quite understand. At first, it seemed open and shut. Nick had a history: substance abuse, anger issues, mental health struggles. He was arrested on the spot. 2 counts of first-degree murder. No bail. Case closed. Or was it? Because just as the media started spinning the narrative, troubled son kills Hollywood parents, another voice rose from the shadows. Romy Reiner, the youngest, the quietest, the one everyone thought was too soft-spoken to challenge anyone, let alone the mighty Tracy Reiner, actress, industry insider, and, some would argue, the heir to her father's empire. But Romy wasn't staying silent. She had seen something. Or maybe she knew something. And what she said in court would rip the case wide open. Why this story matters now. So why are we here? Why are millions suddenly obsessed with a family we rarely heard about before? Because this case isn't just about murder. It's about betrayal. It's about what happens when the people we trust the most, the ones who raised us, shared our childhood bedrooms, celebrated our birthdays, turn into suspects. It's about how money, fame, and legacy can twist love into something deadly. It's about secrets buried behind mansion walls, hidden beneath decades of smiles and scripts. And at the heart of it all, 2 sisters. Romy, Tracy, one crying out for justice, the other crying in court. And if Romy's to be believed, the most dangerous person in this story isn't Nick. It's the sister no one saw coming. The family nobody dared suspect. Until now. Let's get something clear. Tracy Reiner has never been in trouble with the law. She's a working actress, producer, and a fixture in LA's arts community. Most people know her from roles in A League of Their Own, When Harry Met Sally, and even Die Hard. She's friendly. She's connected. She's respected. And maybe that's what makes Romy's accusation so shocking. Because what Romy implied wasn't just that Tracy had knowledge of the murder. She suggested Tracy played a role in it. That Tracy may have manipulated events, covered tracks, and, if the prosecution digs deep enough, may have profited from it too. It's a theory so bold, so damning, that the courtroom practically held its breath as Romy took the stand. We'll get to her testimony soon. But for now, let's remember. Accusations don't come from nowhere. There's smoke here, and we're going to find out if there's fire. Teasing what's to come. Over the next hour, we're going to dive into every chilling layer of this case. The murder night timeline. The surveillance footage the police almost missed. The suspicious changes to Rob and Michelle's will. The diary entry that should have never seen the light of day. The breakdown in court that left Tracy gasping for air. And the biggest twist of all. A buried recording that might hold the truth behind who orchestrated the Reiner family tragedy. And why? Because what if Nick Reiner wasn't the mastermind? What if the real story has been hiding in plain sight? And what if Romy's courtroom accusation wasn't just a desperate cry for attention, but the only sliver of truth in a house full of carefully constructed lies? This is not just another Hollywood scandal. This is a family unraveling before our eyes. And by the time we're done, you may never look at the Reiners the same way again. As Romy sat back in her chair, the courtroom buzzing from her accusation, Tracy leaned forward, her face pale. She opened her mouth, trembling, and just loud enough for the mic to catch it. She whispered, "I didn't want to, but they gave me no choice." The judge called for recess. The courtroom emptied in stunned silence. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. "I didn't want to, but they gave me no choice." The words echoed in Romy's ears as the courtroom cleared for recess. But let's rewind. Because before those words, before the accusation, before the media firestorm and the broken family portrait, there was a night. Just one night. A quiet Sunday in Brentwood. No screams. No warning. Just a mansion full of secrets and two people who would never wake up again. So let me ask you something. What really happened that night? What happened behind the perfectly trimmed hedges of that $13.5 million estate where Hollywood dreams were once built? Only to become the backdrop for a horror story more shocking than any script Rob Reiner ever directed? Let's go inside. 9:14 p.m., the Last Supper. The Reiners had dinner together that night. That part isn't speculation. It's confirmed by the housekeeper, who left just after 8:30 p.m. She said everything was normal. Rob had poured himself a glass of wine. Michelle was finishing a call in the sunroom. Tracy had stopped by briefly earlier in the day to drop off some papers. Nick, reportedly, was in the guest house. No fights. No arguments. Just normalcy. But here's the thing about normal. It's always the calm before something storms in and tears it apart. At 9:14 p.m., a motion-activated camera above the front door recorded what looked like a silhouette passing by. It was tall, unidentifiable, but barefoot. The police dismissed it early on, said it was probably Nick. But what if it wasn't? 9:42 p.m., the first scream. The neighbors didn't hear it clearly. The Brentwood homes are separated by sprawling lawns and thick privacy hedges. But one woman, a retired teacher who lived 2 houses down, told detectives she thought she heard someone scream like a wounded animal. She dismissed it, thought it might be a raccoon. But 18 minutes later, the Reiner home security system registered something else, a window sensor triggering in the master bedroom. That was the moment. The breach. By the time anyone realized what had happened, it was already too late. 10:21 p.m., the 911 call. This is where the timeline begins to fall apart. The 911 call didn't come from the main house. It came from a cell phone, located in the guest house. Nick. His voice was described as slurred, erratic, and distressed. The transcript is chilling. Dispatch. 911, what's your emergency? Caller, I think they're dead. Dispatch. Who is dead, sir? Caller. My mom and dad. There's blood. There's so much blood. I didn't do this. He hung up before responders could get more. When officers arrived just 7 minutes later, the front door was wide open. And inside, chaos. The scene of the crime. Blood was everywhere. The kind of scene that doesn't just suggest rage, it screams it. Rob Reiner was found in the kitchen, crumpled near the counter, still clutching a dish towel. Multiple stab wounds. defensive wounds on his hands. Michelle Reiner was upstairs. Bedroom. Face down. Pillow soaked red. Same pattern of wounds. Sharp, deep, deliberate. It wasn't just an act of violence. It was personal. And that's what made it strange. No signs of forced entry. No signs of robbery. Nothing stolen. Just two beloved figures in pools of their own blood, and a son in the guest house who swore he didn't do it. 10:53 p.m., Nick Reiner's arrest. When officers found Nick, he was shirtless. There was blood on his hands, on his arms, even smeared across his cheek like a child who didn't know how to wipe it off properly. He was dazed. Officers said he looked like he'd been crying, or drugged. Possibly both. He kept repeating the same phrase. I didn't do it. I didn't do it. I didn't do it. But here's what made them suspicious. The blood matched both victims. He had no visible wounds of his own. And when asked where he was when it happened, he didn't know. He said he'd taken something earlier that night. Something to help him sleep. But toxicology later showed no sedatives. No narcotics. So if he wasn't asleep, where was he? And who was he covering for? The missing weapon. You'd think a murder this brutal would leave behind the tool. But no knife was ever found. Not in the house. Not in the garden. Not in Nick's guest house. Even the drain pipes were checked. Nothing. Forensics concluded it was a single-blade kitchen knife, possibly part of a matching set. One that should have been in the Reiner kitchen. But there was a slot missing in the knife block. And guess who had access to the kitchen earlier that day? Tracy. The return visit. Tracy Reiner told police she had stopped by that afternoon, around 2 p.m. She said she came to drop off paperwork from a production meeting Rob was involved in. Said she left by 3:15. The security footage backs this up. A silver Mercedes pulls up. She exits. Stays about an hour. Leaves. All routine. Until you realize one thing. At no point during her time inside was she captured by interior surveillance. Because at some point, someone had disabled the internal motion detectors. Police initially thought it was a tech error. But the control panel log showed manual override. At 2:07 p.m., just minutes after Tracy arrived. Coincidence? Or cover-up? The diary entry that haunts everything. We'll dive into this in more detail later, but here's something you need to know now. Romy found a diary, her mother's, and one of the final entries, written just days before the murder, reads, I've tried to talk to her. She won't listen. I fear she's in over her head. If something happens to us, promise me someone will read this. It's dated 3 days before the killings. And her? According to Romy? That was Tracy. Who was that silhouette? Remember the motion-triggered camera at 9:14 p.m.? For months, it was treated as a technical glitch. A blur. A shadow. Nothing usable. But 6 weeks after the murders, a retired FBI tech offered to enhance the footage for the defense. And what they found? A figure. Medium build. Moving quietly. Barefoot. Carrying what appears to be a cloth-wrapped object. Walking away from the main house, in the direction of the guest house. And they weren't alone. Another figure, shorter, possibly female, appears 2 minutes later, walking briskly across the back patio. 2 people, 2 directions, 2 lives destroyed just minutes earlier. So who were they? And where were they going? The emotional fallout. As news broke the next morning, the entertainment world collapsed into grief. Hollywood tributes poured in. Heartbroken. A legend lost. A devastating tragedy. But the family? Silent. No press conferences. No statements. Just silence. Until Romy showed up to court 2 weeks later. Alone. No Tracy. No Nick. Just her. And a folder clutched tightly in her hands. Inside, a copy of her mother's will and a letter handwritten by Michelle, dated months before her death. We'll talk about that later. But just know this. That folder would light the match. And what came next? Nobody saw it coming. As the prosecution reviewed the surveillance footage frame by frame, something flickered across the screen. A moment missed by everyone. A single second, barely visible. A woman's face. Briefly, half in shadow. Not Nick. Not Romy. But someone familiar. And the moment the footage paused, zoomed in, every single juror turned to look at Tracy Reiner. Because if what they saw was real, then everything was about to change. I didn't do it, Nick repeated, rocking back and forth on the edge of the cot in his cell. I didn't. I swear. The guards had heard it so many times they stopped reacting. The walls of the Los Angeles County Jail were used to confessions, lies, and breakdowns. But Nick Reiner's case wasn't just another murder charge. This was a Hollywood heir accused of butchering both of his parents in cold blood. But what if he didn't? What if the blood on Nick's hands wasn't from guilt, but from grief? Let's strip away the headlines, the mugshots, the sound bites. Let's look deeper. Is Nick Reiner a killer or a pawn? The fall of the Golden Sun. Nick Reiner's story has always been one of contrast. Born into wealth, privilege, and celebrity, he was the only son of Rob and Michelle Reiner. Expectations clung to him like shadows. He grew up on movie sets, attended exclusive schools, and had access to the kind of life most people could only dream of. But dreams, as we all know, can turn into nightmares. Nick battled demons from a young age: addiction, anxiety, depression. There were stints in rehab, whispered stories of drug-fueled breakdowns, and a well-known fallout with his father over career expectations. Rob Reiner wanted him to be a writer. Nick wanted to disappear. In 2015, he co-wrote a film called Being Charlie, based loosely on his own struggles with addiction. It premiered to mixed reviews, but it was a glimpse into the pain Nick carried. And that pain would be used against him. Because when the police arrived on that quiet Sunday night, blood pooled at his feet, and a life's worth of struggles made him the perfect scapegoat. But what really happened? The arrest that raised eyebrows. Let's go back to the night of the murders. Police found Nick barefoot, disoriented, and visibly shaken. His clothes were stained with his parents' blood. He had no alibi, no explanation, and no answers. The prosecution would later argue this was textbook behavior for a guilty man. Panic, guilt, a haze of rage and regret. But forensic psychology tells us something else. Sometimes, trauma looks a lot like guilt. Nick had no cuts or bruises, despite the fact that both Rob and Michelle had defensive wounds. There were no skin cells under their fingernails that matched his DNA. And the bloody prints on the hallway floor? They were smudges, not full matches. More importantly, there was no murder weapon found in his guest house. No trace of it in his possession, not even in the trash. So how does a man kill two people so violently, without a weapon, without wounds, and without leaving a single clean fingerprint? Unless he didn't. The strange phone call. Here's where things get even murkier. At exactly 7:08 p.m., 2 hours before the 911 call, Nick received a phone call from a blocked number. It lasted 1 minute and 17 seconds. The caller was never identified, but cell tower data placed the origin of the call near the Reiner estate. And guess what? Just 12 minutes later, Nick ordered a delivery from Postmates, 2 sandwiches and a bottle of sparkling water. The receipt shows it was delivered at 8:02 p.m. Why would a man plotting a double homicide order dinner? Or maybe the better question is, was that phone call a warning? A threat? A trigger? And who made it? Motive or manipulation? The case against Nick relied heavily on motive. He'd been financially dependent on his parents for years. He'd relapsed the previous fall. There were rumors that Rob and Michelle were preparing to cut him off, again. But here's the twist. 3 weeks before the murders, Rob had reportedly told a friend he was adding Nick back into the will. Not removing him, adding. In fact, according to preliminary probate filings, Nick stood to inherit a $2 million trust. Something Tracy reportedly contested privately after her parents' deaths. So who really had the motive? The troubled son finally welcomed back into the fold, or the daughter suddenly forced to share a legacy she believed belonged to her? The glove that didn't fit. During the early days of the investigation, police seized clothing from both the main house and Nick's guest house. Among them was a single latex glove found in the kitchen trash. It tested positive for Rob's blood. Naturally, this seemed damning, until the prosecution made a mistake. They tried to tie it to Nick's DNA, but lab reports showed something else. The DNA inside the glove didn't match Nick. It was female, and not Romy's. That discovery was quietly buried in early filings. Reporters missed it. Prosecutors called it inconclusive, but the defense saw it differently. If Nick didn't wear the glove, who did? And why was it left in his trash? The missing 3 hours. Nick claimed he blacked out for part of the night. His recollection ended around 8:15 p.m. and resumed sometime after 11, when he walked into the main house and found the bodies. Critics called it convenient, but doctors at the arraignment introduced another possibility. Dissociative episode, triggered by trauma, medication, or extreme psychological stress. It's a documented condition, especially in individuals with Nick's history. His therapist submitted sealed records to the court, citing past episodes. Now, could someone have used that? Could someone have known Nick would dissociate? Could someone have committed the murders, knowing Nick would take the fall? And most importantly, did that someone live just a few blocks away? Tracy's timeline cracks. We touched on this in Chapter 1, but let's dig deeper. Tracy Reiner was at the Brentwood estate earlier that afternoon. She left around 3:15 p.m., according to her own statement. But surveillance footage from a neighbor's Ring camera, obtained later, suggests otherwise. At 5:47 p.m., a car matching her license plate passed the house again, heading west. Why? Where was she going? And why does her phone's location data mysteriously cut out for over 2 hours? She said it was a dead zone, a coverage issue. But digital forensic analysts found manual toggling of airplane mode in her iCloud logs. In other words, she turned her location off. And when it came back online, 8:57 p.m., just minutes before the bloodbath. Coincidence? Or convenience? The journal entry that hints at a frame job. When Romy revealed her mother's diary to authorities, they focused on the obvious: warnings about Tracy, money troubles, and deepening family fractures. But there's one line that stands out, dated a week before the murder. Nick is not well. He needs help, not punishment. I fear he'll be the one they point fingers at first, and he won't know how to defend himself. Was Michelle warning herself? Or warning someone else? And who's they? The basement discovery. 2 days after the murders, crime scene analysts swept the basement of the Brentwood estate. Tucked behind an old wardrobe, they found a discarded hoodie. Black, medium-sized, blood spatter on the sleeves. No name, no initials. DNA analysis was inconclusive, but the blood matched Rob Reiner. When asked if the hoodie belonged to Nick, Romy immediately said no. She recognized it, said it looked identical to one Tracy used to wear on casual set days. And guess what? Old behind-the-scenes footage from a 2020 production shows Tracy wearing that exact same hoodie. Was it the same one? Hard to say, but here's what is clear. Someone had changed clothes in that house and left without being seen. The courtroom bombshell. During preliminary hearings, Tracy's legal team painted Nick as a ticking time bomb. But the defense had one last card. A voicemail, left on Nick's phone at 9:02 p.m. the night of the murders. It was short. The voice hushed. Urgent. Don't go in the house. Let it happen. You'll thank me later. No name. No caller ID. But the voice? Romy swore it was Tracy. Tracy denied it. But the judge ordered a voice comparison expert. The results? Highly probable match. Still not conclusive. Still not enough to convict. But more than enough to create doubt. As Nick sat in court during the preliminary trial, his eyes locked with his sister's for the first time in weeks. Tracy wouldn't look away. But then, a quiet moment. Nick leaned over to his lawyer and whispered something. The lawyer scribbled a note, stood, and announced to the judge, "Your Honor, my client would like to amend his statement." He now remembers something about that night. Something he was afraid to say before. The courtroom froze. What did Nick remember? She said, "If I opened my mouth, I'd regret it for the rest of my life." That's what Nick Reiner told the courtroom when he finally spoke. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't a dramatic outburst. It was quiet, hollow, like a man who'd been carrying the weight of a secret too dark to bear alone. His eyes didn't leave Tracy, but hers? They darted to Romy, just for a second. A flicker of fear, and that's when it hit everyone watching. This wasn't just about murder. This was about a family imploding from the inside. So the real question is, what tore the Reiner siblings apart? The myth of unity. From the outside, the Reiners looked close. Holiday cards, red carpet appearances, warm interviews. Nick, Tracy, and Romy had been portrayed as a tight-knit trio, each different, but united in loyalty to their legendary parents. But behind that picture-perfect mask was something much darker. Bitterness, competition, and a legacy built not on love, but expectation. Tracy, the crown princess of Hollywood. Let's start with Tracy. Adopted by Penny Marshall and later raised by Rob Reiner, Tracy had Hollywood in her blood. She wasn't just an actress. She was part of a dynasty. She starred in classics, worked behind the scenes, networked with industry titans. People said she was the next Penny. She had ambition, drive, control. But that control, according to Romy, came with a cost. She always wanted to be the one in charge. Even in childhood, she didn't like sharing the spotlight, or our parents. Over time, Tracy became the de facto family manager, controlling schedules, public appearances, and even financial decisions when Rob's health began to decline. But with that control came resentment, especially from the other two Reiner kids. Nick, the prodigal son. Then there's Nick, the one who broke the mold. Sensitive, rebellious, deeply creative, but tortured by the pressure of legacy. Rob Reiner pushed him to write, to produce, to stay clean. Nick just wanted to breathe. He spent years in and out of rehab, his name whispered at charity galas and production meetings as the problem child. Tracy, according to close friends, was furious at the attention Nick received. She was working every day to build something. He was unraveling. And still, their parents poured time and money into trying to fix him. That bitterness simmered for years, until one day, it boiled over. Romy, the outlier. Romy Reiner never fit the mold. She wasn't a starlet. She wasn't a writer. She was the quiet one. She drew. She painted. She stayed out of the spotlight and away from Hollywood drama. And perhaps that's why she saw so much. She wasn't in the game. She was watching it. I saw how Tracy controlled everything, she later said. I saw how she twisted people. How she made Dad feel guilty. How she made Nick feel crazy. But Romy kept her distance. Until the murders. That's when she stepped into the spotlight. Not for fame, but for truth. And in doing so, she declared war on the sister she once called a protector. The final argument. Weeks before the murders, something happened. A fight. Not just any fight. A blowout between all three siblings. It took place at the Brentwood estate. Nick had just relapsed. Tracy accused him of draining their parents' sympathy. Romy tried to defend him. According to court testimony from a family friend, Tracy shouted, "When they're gone, we'll see who gets what." The room went silent. Rob had reportedly overheard it. Michelle pulled Tracy aside. Tensions rose. Romy left early that day, crying. Nick disappeared for 2 days. And Rob? He called his attorney. The will nobody saw coming. Just days before the murder, Rob Reiner made a change to his will. For years, the estate had been divided equally between the 3 children. But this new version? It redirected the bulk of the assets, an estimated $9.6 million in property and liquid funds, into a trust managed by Romy, with Nick as a partial beneficiary after completing a wellness program. Tracy was cut to 15%. She didn't know. Not officially, but according to the family's former financial advisor, she suspected. And she was furious. The letter in the attic. After the murders, Romy discovered a sealed envelope tucked inside her mother's old writing desk in the attic. It was addressed simply, to be opened in case of emergency. Inside, a letter, handwritten, dated 4 days before the murder. Michelle wrote, "Romy, I know you'll be the one to find this. I've tried to reason with your sister. She's not the same. She's angry, cold. I don't trust her around your father when I'm not home. If anything happens to us, look to her, not Nick. He's troubled, yes, but not cruel." The letter was introduced as evidence in court. Tracy's legal team called it a forgery. A handwriting expert disagreed. The alleged blackmail. More shocking still were rumors, later confirmed in court filings, that Tracy had been under investigation for possible financial fraud. A shell company. Shady real estate investments. Money that couldn't be traced. And when Rob found out, he froze a joint account. Romy told the court. Dad was going to confront her, but he was scared, not of her temper, of what she might do to Nick. According to her testimony, Rob feared Tracy might try to use Nick's addiction as a smokescreen for something darker. And then, Rob and Michelle were dead. Phone records don't lie. In the week leading up to the murders, Tracy made 7 calls to a number registered under a burner phone, the same number that called Nick the night of the killings. She said it belonged to a business contact. But prosecutors subpoenaed that phone's location data. It pinged within 100 feet of the Reiner estate on the night of the murders. And more disturbing, that same number texted Romy after her courtroom testimony, saying, "You should have stayed silent." It was traced, deactivated, gone. But Romy kept the message. And the fear. Sibling showdown. As the trial moved forward, the once publicly united siblings were now bitter enemies. Nick blamed Tracy. Romy accused her in open court. And Tracy? She wept, shouted, denied, and deflected. In one explosive moment, she yelled at Romy across the courtroom. "You're just jealous. You always were." To which Romy replied, "Of what? Of being able to lie to their faces while planning their deaths." The room fell silent. The judge called for order. But the war had already begun. Public reaction turns. At first, the public sympathized with Tracy. She was glamorous, articulate, the daughter of two icons. But as testimony piled up, sympathy shifted. Fans of Rob Reiner began questioning everything. Social media exploded with theories. Hashtag Justice for Romy trended. Tracy's past interviews were dissected. Whispers about her controlling nature resurfaced. Photos of her with shady investors resurfaced online. The Golden Girl's shine was cracking, and beneath it, something rotten. As Tracy left the courtroom one evening, cameras flashing, reporters shouting, she whispered something to her attorney. He shook his head. She whispered again, this time more urgently. He nodded, and then he approached the judge the next morning with a stunning revelation. "Your Honor, Ms. Reiner intends to present an alternate theory of the case, one that involves a member of this courtroom." Everyone turned. Tracy's eyes locked on Romy. And in that moment, a new question was born. Was Tracy about to flip the narrative and accuse her sister of murder? And why had he stayed silent until now? If they had just checked that camera earlier, maybe none of this would have happened. That's what Romy whispered as the courtroom sat in stunned silence. Tracy had just done the unthinkable. She accused her of being involved in Rob and Michelle Reiner's deaths. Romy's voice didn't shake. She didn't cry. She just stared forward, lips pressed tight, while the press lost their minds. The Reiner family feud had officially become a three-sided war. But this wasn't just about finger-pointing. Because behind all the accusations, buried in the chaos of grief and courtroom games, there was something much colder, more factual, and impossible to deny. Footage. Hidden. Ignored. Almost lost forever. And when it finally surfaced, it changed everything. The forgotten camera. Brentwood homes are built like fortresses. Gated entrances. Private security. Motion detectors. Camera systems tucked into every corner. The Reiner estate had 12 cameras, each feeding to a local server tucked in a closet behind Rob's home office. Most of them faced standard locations: front gate, driveway, main entrance, guest house path. But one pointed at the backyard, specifically the west-facing patio door that led directly into the kitchen. It was rarely triggered, used mostly to monitor the gardener or deliveries. It wasn't reviewed the night of the murders. Why? Because when detectives pulled surveillance, they assumed the critical moments happened indoors or near the front entrance where Nick was found. They missed the one camera that saw everything. A second chance. Enter forensic tech Joshua Delgado. A former FBI technician turned private consultant, Delgado had been hired by Nick's defense to review digital evidence. He requested access to the server drives. Most of the Reiner family's footage had already been copied into police files. But Delgado noticed something strange. Camera 11, the one covering the west patio, was listed but never cataloged. It had been labeled inactive by investigators due to a supposed wiring error. But when Delgado restored the power system and scanned the hard drive, the feed lit up. And what he found would become the most explosive piece of evidence in the entire trial. 9:13 p.m., a shadow appears. The footage begins quietly. It's dark. The wind rustles the palm trees. Nothing moves. Then, at 9:13 p.m., a figure emerges from the side yard. No sound, just motion. The person is tall, medium build, wearing dark clothing, moving briskly, almost deliberately. They approach the sliding glass door, the back entrance to the kitchen. No attempt to knock. No hesitation. They pull something from their sleeve. It glints under the patio light. A key. They unlock the door. Step inside. The timestamp matches exactly with the forensic estimate of when Rob was attacked. 9:22 p.m., the second figure. 9 minutes later, another figure appears. This one smaller, slower, hunched slightly. The second person doesn't approach the house. They pause near the rose bushes, then vanish off screen toward the side of the house, where the guest house lies. A flashlight flicks on for a brief moment, and just as quickly, it disappears. Investigators would later confirm the bushes were disturbed, branches bent, Footprints found. 2 people. Same time frame. But only one was ever arrested. Delgado's breakdown. Delgado slowed the footage. Enhanced it. Pulled stills. The first figure was roughly 5 feet 7 inches to 5 feet 9 inches. Broad shoulders. Left-handed. They carried what looked like a rolled cloth, possibly concealing something long and metallic. The way they moved? Confident. Like someone who knew the house well. Like someone who had been there many times. And the second figure? Likely 5 feet 4 inches or shorter. Narrow frame. Moved cautiously. Possibly barefoot. One forensic analysis noted. The body language of the first subject suggests they expected no resistance. The second subject? They're watching. Possibly acting as a lookout. So who were they? And why didn't police review this earlier? Confrontation in court. When Delgado's footage was played in court, the gallery gasped. Romy watched without blinking. Nick bowed his head. And Tracy? She smiled. Not big. Not long. Just for a second. As if something had gone exactly the way she'd planned. When questioned by the prosecution, she didn't deny the footage. She simply said, "I've been in that house 1,000 times. That could be anyone." But Romy had something else. Something better. The hoodie match. Flashback to a family barbecue. Summer of 2022. Photos show Tracy wearing a black hoodie with a distinct tear near the left wrist. A designer piece with limited release. The figure in the footage? Same height. Same posture. And yes, same left wrist tear. Romy pulled the photo from her phone and showed it to the DA. It was entered into evidence. Still not conclusive. Still not proof beyond a shadow of doubt. But the needle was moving. And not in Tracy's favor. The trash can clue. Here's where it gets weirder. When Delgado examined the footage frame by frame, he caught something police had missed. At 9:47 p.m., just after the murders, the first figure exits through the same patio door, now holding a small white bag. They walk behind the house and toss it into a black bin. Investigators returned to the property weeks later. The trash had long been emptied. But when they subpoenaed Waste Management GPS logs, they found that only one bin had been moved between 10 o'clock and 11 p.m. that night. The bin closest to the garden. Why does that matter? Because that is where the missing kitchen knife was believed to be disposed of. Gone. But traced back to that moment. The garden glove. But not everything vanished. During a second sweep of the garden beds, a detective found something half buried in loose soil near the roses. A latex glove. It had traces of blood, dirt, and DNA from Michelle Reiner. Inside, skin cells. Female. Not Romy. Not Michelle. Not matched to any household staff. Preliminary tests were inconclusive. But here's the twist. 2 months later, a lab confirmed the skin cell sample was consistent with Tracy Reiner's mitochondrial DNA. Her lawyers demanded suppression. The judge allowed it, citing chain of custody issues. But the jury? They heard enough to start doubting. The lookout theory. The presence of the second figure raised new questions. Was it Romy? Tracy suggested it was, saying Romy had been in the garden that night to sneak a cigarette, something she'd allegedly done before. But Romy's alibi was solid. She was at a friend's house until 10:30 p.m. Phone location data backed it up. So did the friend, who testified under oath. So who was the second person? Was Tracy working with someone? Or was that person a witness? A silent observer? And could they still come forward? The mystery flashlight. A final eerie detail. As the second figure moves toward the guest house, their flashlight flashes once, then goes dark. When enhanced by Delgado's team, the light beam reflects off a metallic object already on the ground. The theory? The weapon had already been discarded, hidden temporarily under the garden bed. Which means the murders had already happened. And the second figure? They were there to clean up. Or maybe, to see it with their own eyes. The police's quiet error. The LAPD took heat once the footage was exposed. Critics slammed the department for missing such vital evidence. Internal reports showed that the lead investigator had flagged camera 11 as corrupted based on a glitch in the wiring system. Turns out, it was never tested again. Had Delgado not reviewed it, this footage might have never surfaced. And if you're wondering if that's suspicious, you're not alone. Online theories now claim that someone inside the department may have been pressured to overlook the footage. By whom? That's the question. But here's what we know. After this footage came to light, 2 key detectives were quietly reassigned. As the final frame of the video replayed, showing the first figure disappearing down the driveway. The prosecution paused. They turned to Tracy and asked, "Ms. Reiner, were you ever in possession of the security codes to that back door?" She hesitated, looked at her lawyer, and said, "I had them, but I never used them." But moments later, the DA revealed something else. An email sent from Rob Reiner's account to Tracy just 48 hours before his death. Subject line: New access codes, do not share. Attachment: a PDF, the updated key code to the back patio. And guess what? The code used at 9:13 p.m. was the old one, which meant someone had accessed the door before Rob changed the locks, before he died. And the only person still using the outdated code? Tracy Reiner. "If something happens to us, promise me someone will read this." That single line, handwritten, nearly forgotten in the chaos. A quiet plea from a mother who clearly saw something coming. Maybe not the how, maybe not the when, but the who. That part, she seemed sure about. When Romy Reiner found the diary, she wasn't looking for clues. She wasn't playing detective. She wasn't hunting for headlines. She was grieving, cleaning out her parents' bedroom, folding clothes, bagging up old books for donation. And then, tucked inside the drawer of her mother's writing desk, was a worn leather-bound journal tied shut with an old satin ribbon. The moment she opened it, the air in the room changed. Because what Romy read next wouldn't just tear open old wounds, it would drag the entire Reiner case into uncharted territory. Let's talk about the diary that wasn't supposed to exist. The last words of Michelle Reiner. Michelle wasn't known for drama. Quiet, elegant, and fiercely private, she often faded into the background of Rob Reiner's fame. But those who knew her well described her as watchful, intuitive, someone who saw beneath the surface. And as the murder case unfolded, it became clear Michelle had sensed something was off. Not with Nick, not with Romy, with Tracy. The diary timeline. The diary spans 5 months. The first few entries are innocent, daily musings, recipes, to-do lists. But by the halfway point, the tone darkens. Suddenly, we see a woman unraveling secrets behind closed doors. Here are some excerpts. These were entered into evidence during the trial. February 7th. Tracy asked for another $200,000 today. She says it's for a film project, but something feels off. Rob wants to say no, but she gets so cold when we push back. March 12th. Romy told me Tracy snapped at her again. I told her to stay calm, but deep down, I'm afraid. This family is fraying. April 28th. We had a fight tonight. Tracy left angry. Rob says she's just stressed. But I saw her face. That wasn't stress. That was something darker. May 3rd, 4 days before the murders. I caught her in the kitchen going through the drawer where we keep the will. She said she was looking for a pen, but I know she was lying. She's up to something. May 5th, last entry. If something happens to us, promise me someone will read this. Romy, I know it'll be you. You were always the one who looked. Please don't let this end with silence. The courtroom sat frozen as these entries were read aloud. Tracy? She stared straight ahead. No tears. No blink. Just silence. Authenticity confirmed. Tracy's legal team initially tried to have the diary dismissed. Forgery, they claimed. Romy planted it to smear her sister. But the DA had anticipated that. A handwriting expert from the California Department of Justice compared the entries to Michelle's known writings, letters, notes, even birthday cards to her children. Their verdict? 100% match. Even the ink, paper, and writing pressure were consistent with Michelle's hand. But the most chilling confirmation came from Rob Reiner himself, in a voicemail recovered after his death. Rob's last message. It was a voicemail left on the Reiner's estate attorney's office line. Dated 2 days before the murder. Hey Doug, it's Rob. Michelle's got something she wants notarized, some kind of diary. Honestly, I think she's just being paranoid about Tracy. But I promised her I'd help. I'll have her drop it off tomorrow. The diary never made it to the attorney. And 2 days later, both Rob and Michelle were dead. Coincidence? Or something far more sinister? Romy's testimony. When Romy took the stand to explain how she found the diary, she didn't cry. Her voice was steady. Her hands never trembled. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I just missed my mom. I was packing up her books, and there it was. She told the court she almost didn't read it. That part of her didn't want to know. But as she flipped through the final entries, She said one sentence stood out more than any other. She said she trusted me to finish what she couldn't start. The courtroom fell silent. Even Tracy couldn't look her in the eye. The diary's impact. The diary forced the court to reevaluate the timeline. Suddenly, Tracy's presence in the house days before the murder meant something. The unexplained argument with Michelle, no longer hearsay. The mysterious bank withdrawals. The will updates. It was no longer speculation. It was a pattern. The defense, however, struck back. They claimed Michelle was confused, possibly experiencing early signs of dementia. They argued the entries were the ramblings of an anxious woman under stress. But then came the bank records. Follow the money. 2 weeks before the murders, a $200,000 wire was made from Rob and Michelle's joint account to a shell corporation listed as Tracorp Holdings. It had no address, no website, no listed business activity. But its signatory? Tracy Reiner. When questioned, she said it was a temporary LLC for a film investment that fell through. But that LLC had only existed for 48 hours, and it was dissolved the day after the murder. How did she know to shut it down? Unless she knew her access to that account was about to be revoked? Buried addendum. Here's where it gets even wilder. Inside the diary, tucked behind the last page, was a folded note, initialed by Rob and Michelle. It was dated May 4th, a joint addendum to their will. It read, "To our children, this is our final wish. Tracy is to have no managerial control over estate assets. We love her, but we no longer trust her judgment. Romy will assume executive rights, and Nick shall be granted conditional trust access upon continued recovery." That note was signed, witnessed, and legally valid. The Reiner family attorney confirmed Rob dropped it off the day before the murder. The timing? Devastating. Public fallout. As this evidence exploded across media channels, public perception shifted again. Hashtag Justice for Romy trended globally. Paparazzi followed Tracy's every step. Celebrities who once stood in her corner began to distance themselves. In interviews, former friends of the Reiners started speaking out. One producer said, "Tracy always had control issues. She didn't like surprises. She didn't like losing." Another said, "She had a way of making you feel like you owed her, even when she was the one in debt." People were beginning to connect dots they hadn't dared to before. Tracy's denial. When Tracy returned to the stand after the diary revelation, she didn't flinch. She denied everything. "My mother had her moods. She was protective of Nick. She never liked it when I spoke hard truths. That's what this is, her misinterpreting my concern." But under cross-examination, she slipped. When asked why she didn't contest the diary's existence earlier, she said, "Because I knew she kept one." Pause. The prosecution leaned in. "You said earlier you didn't know about any diary." Silence. "Which is it, Ms. Reiner?" Tracy's lawyer objected. The judge sustained. But the damage? Done. Cliffhanger ending to Chapter 5. As Romy left the courtroom that afternoon, reporters swarmed. But she didn't speak. She just clutched the diary against her chest, like armor. That night, someone broke into her car. Nothing was stolen. Except one thing. The diary. Cameras caught a hooded figure fleeing the scene. The police released a statement saying they were reviewing footage. But the next morning, a package arrived at the courthouse. Inside, the diary, and a note. "I'm done covering for her. It's time the truth came out." No signature, no prints. But 3 people were in that courtroom when the theft happened. Romy, Nick, and Tracy. And only one of them had the motive to want that diary gone. Love doesn't kill parents. But money? Money might. Those words, spoken by the prosecution midway through the trial, hung in the air like a slow-moving dagger. Because up until now, the case had danced on the edge of tragedy, dysfunction, and suspicion. But this was the point where it all snapped into cold, calculated clarity. 2 deaths, a diary, a broken family, and behind it all, $11 million. That was the real weight in the room, heavier than grief, louder than accusations. And in this chapter, we unpack the motive that, if proven, might explain everything. The estate breakdown. Rob and Michelle Reiner weren't just famous. They were wealthy. Together, they had amassed a $13.5 million Brentwood estate, $4.2 million in liquid investments, $2.8 million in trust accounts, royalties from Rob's film library, estimated at $1.6 million annually. Personal valuables, art, and intellectual property rights. Add that up, and you get a staggering figure. $22 million in total assets, conservatively. But here's the thing. Before the murders, Rob and Michelle were planning to restructure everything. They didn't want to die without a plan. And in early April, their estate lawyer began the process of updating the will. That's when the sparks began to fly. Original will versus final draft. The original 2017 will divided everything equally. 33% to Tracy, 33% to Nick, 34% to Romy, slightly more due to an early inheritance advance given to Tracy. But in 2025, everything changed. According to the estate attorney, Rob and Michelle made the following updates. Nick's share would be placed in a conditional trust, with strict rules about sobriety and mental wellness. Tracy's share would be reduced from 33% to 15%. Romy would receive controlling interest in the estate, including legal authority over trust disbursements and decision-making on all intellectual property. It wasn't just a redistribution. It was a power shift. One that Tracy allegedly didn't see coming until it was too late. Why the change? Two reasons, according to Romy and the estate attorney. Trust erosion. Rob and Michelle were reportedly alarmed by several large, unapproved withdrawals from a joint account. Authorized by Tracy using a power of attorney she was never supposed to still have. Behavioral concerns. Michelle confided in her lawyer and Romy that Tracy had grown increasingly aggressive and had begun questioning their mental competence. They feared Tracy might challenge the will in the future, so they fast-tracked the changes. The attorney was due to finalize the signing on May 7th. Rob and Michelle were murdered on May 5th. The Tracorp shell game. Let's go back to that $200,000 transfer we mentioned earlier, from Rob and Michelle to a mysterious LLC called Tracorp Holdings. After digging, investigators uncovered something chilling. Tracorp had been created 4 days before the money was wired. Its listed business address? A UPS drop box in North Hollywood. Its projected business activity? Consulting services for creative financing. No employees. No clients. No tax ID. But public records showed one name attached as the registered agent. Tracy Reiner. When questioned, she claimed it was for a real estate project. But emails retrieved from her personal server suggested otherwise. The email thread that broke the courtroom. On May 3rd, 2 days before the murders. Tracy emailed an associate named Mark Fisher, a known Hollywood fixer with a reputation for laundering funds through shell companies. The email read, "Need the transfer cleaned through the loop before Monday. They're pulling the plug. Can't let that happen. We'll update you on access once the lock is changed." Fisher refused to testify, but the email metadata was verified. IP address, Tracy's home in West Hollywood. The subject line, TNR solution. Final phase, TNR, Tracy and Reiner? The DA thought so. Access to the estate. Tracy was one of only 3 people with a key to the Brentwood Estate's master lock system. She had access to all doors, security codes, and the basement where financial files were kept. That access was due to be revoked the week of May 6th. Rob had already spoken to a security tech to update the codes. But those changes? They never happened, because Rob and Michelle were killed before the security system could be reset. The same weekend their will was being finalized. The same weekend Tracy's access was scheduled to end. The vault. Rob and Michelle kept all sensitive documents, wills, investments, contracts, in a locked room on the 2nd floor of their home, nicknamed the vault. After the murders, police found the room ransacked. Drawers pulled. Files missing. Security camera in the hallway? Disabled. But they did find one thing left behind. A torn page. From a trust document. It was the disbursement breakdown showing Romy's new controlling share. The corner was torn, but Tracy's name was still visible. And next to it, disburse 15% net assets upon legal confirmation of estate succession. If that document had been submitted to the courts, Tracy would have received significantly less than she originally expected. So, what would she do to stop that from happening? The confrontation. According to Romy, just days before the murder, Tracy confronted her at a cafe near Melrose Avenue. Romy said Tracy looked tense, wired, and pale. She allegedly leaned across the table and said, You have no idea what you're walking into. You don't want to be the favorite, Romy. That crown cuts. Romy didn't respond, but she remembers Tracy's final words clearly. If they do this to me, if they erase me, I'll erase them. That same day, Romy texted her mom. Tracy's scaring me. Please call me. No response, because Michelle's phone had already been turned off. A sudden drop in the markets. Hours after Rob and Michelle were pronounced dead, one more strange thing happened. A trust account linked to Rob's film royalties saw a sudden liquidation of $180,000 worth of assets. It wasn't a random crash. It was a deliberate withdrawal. Tracing the transfer revealed it went to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, registered under a blind trust that, once again, connected back to Tracorp Holdings. And remember, Tracorp was dissolved the day after the murder. It was a cash-out, a final sweep, and the only person with access? Tracy. The courtroom crumbles. As this financial web unraveled, Tracy's composure began to crack. Gone was the controlled, elegant actress. In her place, a woman cornered. During cross-examination, the prosecutor asked, Ms. Reiner, why did your shell company dissolve 24 hours after your parents died? Tracy stammered, said it was a coincidence. And why did you transfer $180,000 from a Reiner-controlled trust to that company? She paused. Her lawyer objected, but the judge allowed the question. And Tracy's answer? I don't remember making that transfer, but the digital signature said otherwise. IP address, timestamp, device ID, all pointed to her. A motive too loud to ignore. In the end, money isn't just numbers. It's motive. It's power. And when that power is slipping away, when a lifetime of entitlement, privilege, and expectation suddenly turns to ashes, people snap, people lie, and sometimes people kill. Tracy didn't just stand to lose $11 million. She stood to lose her position, her power, her control over the Reiner legacy. And as one former friend testified, Tracy never feared losing money. She feared becoming irrelevant. And that might be the most dangerous fear of all. The day the prosecution rested their financial case, Tracy didn't show up to court. Her lawyer claimed she was sick, but a private investigator hired by Romy's legal team spotted her that afternoon, meeting quietly in the parking garage of a luxury hotel. She wasn't alone. Next to her, Mark Fisher, the same man linked to Tracorp Holdings. They spoke for 13 minutes, then parted ways. That night, Fisher booked a one-way flight to Switzerland. And Tracy? She went home. But when she got there, she found something on her doorstep. A single envelope. Inside, a photo of her and Fisher, taken just hours earlier. No note. Just one sentence scrawled across the back. Tell the truth before someone else does. She wasn't just an actress. She was a gatekeeper. And if you crossed her, good luck working in this town again. That quote came from a producer. Anonymous, of course. Because even now, with Tracy Reiner on trial, her shadow still lingers in certain Hollywood corners. Quiet, watchful. For decades, Tracy stood not only as Rob Reiner's daughter, but as a fixture in the industry. A behind-the-scenes strategist. A fixer. A name whispered at studio brunches and silenced at production meetings. But now, that name was being shouted in courtrooms, scrawled across tabloid headlines, and dissected by millions. What they didn't know was how deep her influence ran, and how that influence may have played a part in 2 murders, a frame job, and a long-silenced network of lies. This is the part of the story where Hollywood meets horror. This is Tracy's web. From legacy to leverage. Tracy Reiner wasn't just Rob Reiner's daughter. She was Penny Marshall's biological child, Carl Reiner's granddaughter. Her bloodline was gold. Her last name? Platinum. She had a front-row seat to the inner workings of the entertainment industry from the time she could walk. She didn't need to audition. She was Hollywood. But she didn't chase stardom like others. She chased control. While her peers were begging for roles, Tracy was building networks, deep, strategic relationships with agents, producers, financiers, even attorneys. And in those shadows, she thrived. She knew how to smile with her eyes while twisting the knife, said one ex-assistant. The influence machine. Let's break down the empire Tracy quietly built by the mid-2020s. Executive producer credits on over a dozen films, many through indie shells or under pseudonyms. Silent partnerships in at least 3 boutique production houses. connections to two top-tier talent agencies, one of which represented high-profile legal consultants, ownership stake in a celebrity crisis PR firm that handled scandals for stars caught in affairs, drug busts, and worse. In public, she was an actress, but behind closed doors, she was a chess master. And she knew how to clean up messes or create them. The associates that vanished. Here's where things take a darker turn. When prosecutors started digging into Tracy's finances,